All right, I'm sorry about that, guys. Hopefully the sound is better now. I'll give you guys a few minutes to see if this is working better. Are you still unable to hear me? Having some trouble with the sound, I think. You hear me okay? Oh, great. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. I had some annoying little disruptions with the sound, but if you can't hear me, just say something in the comments and I'll try to fix it. And I apologize for my voice. I'm getting over being sick. But what I wanted to talk to you guys about today is assessing where your horse is in their training and some basic principles that I adhere to, and then how to set up a schooling session with your horse for maximum productivity. So to get started, I'm going to turn my camera around just so that you can look at some stuff I wrote on my whiteboard here. All right, so what you have here is rhythm is the first, and I'll explain what each of these means as we go through, but rhythm is the first, then we have alignment, and then we have tempo or range of motion, and then we have acceptance of the aids, and then we have specific movements or specific figures. So I'll let you guys look at this again. If you're interested in writing that down, I'll give you a few minutes, but essentially, these are in order of most important. So I'll go over what each of these means now. So rhythm is essentially the horse's ability to regulate their movement. I'm going to turn this around again. And let me know if you guys want to see that again. I'm happy to turn the camera around also. But rhythm is the horse's ability to regulate their movement. So it means that there is a predictable pattern of footfalls. So in the walk, you would have 4 beats. What that means is that the horse would be walking 1, 2, 3, 4. Rhythm is essential for creating the beginnings of balance because it teaches the horse to make the same output basically on all 4 legs. And if you start to watch a horse in movement, if you're at the barn watching your friends, or you're studying horses moving around as they're being ridden, if you watch the way that they move, most horses tend to move a little bit quicker in the front than in the back. In other words, their front legs tend to pull closer underneath their chest and take shorter, faster little strides than the hind legs. And the reason is because they are using their forelegs to create most of the stability. In other words, they're initiating movement with their forelegs more. They are bracing on the forelegs more. They are using their forelegs for most things a little bit more heavy duty than the hind legs. So the study of developing a horse in the classical tradition is really to teach the horse to transfer some weight from the forehand to the hindquarters so that the hindquarters are generating more output, more power, more weight load carrying, and so on. And so rhythm is at the bottom of the training scale because it's the beginning of teaching the horse to create the same output on all 4 legs. So a horse that is rotated, falling in through turns and so on, would not be using the same amount of output on all 4 legs. You would have a different degree of weight bearing and even a different stride length in all 4 legs. So rhythm is the basis of creating the ability of the horse to use all 4 legs. But deeper than that, and more importantly than that, rhythm creates the ability of the horse to breathe deeply. And there is a lot of value in rhythm if you look at people who do body work, such as craniosacral or PT. A lot of times rhythm is used in the relaxation of muscles and the integration of the nervous system and the muscular and fascial systems, because they kind of get everything congruent. So rhythm is the beginning of teaching the horse not just to get balanced and to get calm and comfortable moving a little bit straighter, but it is the beginning of teaching them to be emotionally regulated enough to learn. So rhythm is the most important piece that we can start with, because it teaches the horse basically to be able to show up to school being focused and calm at the same time, and to breathe deeply. And if you watch a lot of ridden or working horses, they don't breathe deeply all the way into their last rib or into their flank. They take very shallow little breaths. And that lack of deep breathing is actually extremely inhibiting into the development of them using their core and their back, because their muscles aren't able to expand and work in the way that they're supposed to. So they will start off at a disadvantage. So that's why rhythm is the most important. It basically is the framework that we can build on from there. So rhythm is the ability of the horse to take relatively the same length of stride with all four legs, to be able to be calm, focused, and breathing deeply. And to me, those are non-negotiables. Starting with the horses, we have to establish the ability of the horse to learn and feel good about learning. And then from there, we have alignment. And what that essentially means is that the spine is in the middle and we have legs on either side. So building on using rhythm to help straighten out the horse, alignment is where the left front and left hind would be on the same line, and the right front and right hind would be on the same line. So you would essentially have two train tracks that the horse is traveling in between. And in the classical dressage tradition, that is extremely important, is developing straightness over time. But if we are turning every corner by bringing the inside front inward and the outside hind outward, it's pretty hard to develop from there. So alignment is really important to establish along with rhythm, so that the horse can move forward and develop into a better balance. Then we start to play around with tempo. So tempo is essentially how slow or how fast these stride lengths are. So rhythm would be already established. So if you have a walk, you would be going 1, 2, 3, 4, pretty steady all the way around the ring. But you would start to develop better balance in varying tempos, or even backing that up a step with a green horse, you start to establish the tempo that helps them balance most. And that's different from horse to horse, but essentially you're looking for about what length of stride or what rate of the descent of the limbs is going to help the horse be the most balanced. So you don't want to go too slow for some horses. You don't want to go too fast for some horses. It kind of depends on that individual horse. But basically tempo is where we start to play around with range of motion. So from here, once the horse is rhythmic and aligned and has a tempo that allows them to be relaxed in, that's when I start wanting to play with longer and shorter strides, as long as the horse can maintain rhythm. And what that starts to teach the horse is to have better range of motion. So the easiest way to think about it is not actually what gait the horse is going in, or how fast or how slow they're going, but how long the strides can go before the horse loses balance. And this is a really important concept, because if we try to make the strides, an easy example would be a Western pleasure horse. A poorly trained one. Let's say you take that cripplingly slow canter, right? So the horse is cantering so slow that it actually can't make a clear 3-beat canter. That is a tempo that is detrimental to rhythm, meaning that the horse's speed is so slow that it can't maintain a rhythm. So we always want to work within the framework of rhythm when we're adjusting tempo. So for a lot of retrained Western dressage horses, we would actually want to increase the tempo to get a rhythm. So the other thing to think about too is when it comes to stiffness, to motion, there's a general use it or lose it kind of a rule. In other words, if you sit at a desk all the time like this, pretty soon your muscles conform to this posture. And so if I try to make myself go to here, I can actually find that really difficult to get into, or my muscles will be too tight. And in the extreme worst case scenario, I could actually hurt myself trying to adopt a extremely opposite posture, even a quote unquote good one. So with tempo, what we are increasing is range of motion or flexibility while adding stability. So we want to change tempo gradually so that the horse has time to adjust their balance, to get comfortable, to start to allow muscle fibers to stretch, and so on. So that's tempo. Then we start to bring in acceptance of the aids. And one thing that I think about often is that the horse has to be open in the body for the aids to go through. So if you get on a horse that is crooked and really stiff and really resistant, let's say kind of a sluggish, pokey horse, it would be very easy to say that this horse is dull to the aids, when in fact their body is just so closed up and so stuck in compensation that the aids are not able to pass through. So the reason that rhythm, alignment, and tempo come in first is all of those things give the horse the ability to open and to move and to find better breathing, better range of motion, and suddenly they are more receptive to the leg, not because they're actually more tuned up to the aids through training. They're actually just in a better physical spot to be able to actually respond to that leg. So instead of, kicking and kicking and kicking and whipping and whipping and whipping, for example, we would need to revisit rhythm, alignment, tempo, and then we might find a very forward horse or a much more receptive to the leg, much more ability to receive the leg aid. So then from there, we go on to specific movements and specific figures. And this is kind of a mind boggler sometimes, because we get into some debates about what the movements are used for and what the figures are used for and that kind of a thing. But let's say that you are on that crooked horse again, so the same one that wasn't very receptive to the leg, and we're trying to use circles to supple him, which is a fabulous exercise. But let's say, for example, that we don't have rhythm, we don't have alignment, we don't have a good tempo, and we don't have acceptance of the aids, and we try to go right to the circle. The horse is going to be forced to fall in and fall out and slow down and speed up and so on. And what happens from there is basically just a Jenga game of aids, inside rein, inside leg, this, that, the other, and it's a constant fixing. So we actually don't have any harmony, we don't have any fluidity. And the intent of the circle as a suppling exercise is totally missed on this horse because he doesn't have the framework that makes him capable of doing that. So what I often call that is right exercise, wrong time. The horse is not prepared enough to be able to perform the circle, and so we're trying to make him deadlift a bunch of weights when he actually can't even get straight at the gym with his own body. So when I'm riding a horse or I'm working with a horse and I get into the arena and I'm trying to assess, say it's a horse I've never met before, and I'm trying to assess what is an appropriate schooling session for this horse. What is it that I need to start with this horse? What I want to think of is those principles in that order. So first, can I establish rhythm? Is the horse breathing deeply? Is he calm? Is he focused? Is he able to be next to my body, either in hand or have my body on him if I'm riding, and feel comfortable with that presence on him? And I think a lot of us actually discount the value of just assessing that. Is the horse bracing their back or dropping their back just because I'm sitting there? So those are really important first, is how are we feeling about being together? Can I get a rhythm in the warm-up and establish that easily? And if you start to pay attention to the way horses go in your warm-up, slow down or speed up at every corner, or they fall in at the corner and then take the whole long side to recoup, and so on. And so you're basically, you would be out of rhythm, you would be out of alignment, and you would be in the wrong tempo. So you would have constant correcting to fix that throughout the whole ride. That would never get better. So rhythm would be at the top of the list. Can this horse get rhythmic? So let's say that I've gotten to the point where the horse is now rhythmic. Now I want to start thinking about riding him between those two train tracks. So the right side and the left side are traveling straight. Spine is in the middle, neck is in the center of the chest. So that would be the second part, is that a possibility? And a lot of times you'll find that when you start trying to straighten the horse on a straight line down the, let's say you're going, here's the wall of the arena, and you're going down the wall, you might find kind of a ping pong game. They fall out, they fall in. Scrape your knee off on the wall, fall into the corner, and so on. So that would be the next important thing to work on. While maintaining the rhythm, you start to say, can you stay between these two train tracks around the ring? And I think a lot of us discount the importance of how important that is to teach the horse. We start trying to move on ahead to figures and transitions and so on before the horse is even really clear of how to get into alignment. So now let's say you've got the horse going relatively straight. Doesn't have to be perfect. Now we can start to play around with longer and shorter strides without losing rhythm. And just to quickly check, can you guys still hear me? Hopefully the audio is still good. All right, you guys will speak up if you can't hear me, right? Good. All right. So now we want to be able to play around with being able to take longer and shorter strides within that rhythm and within that alignment. So if we jump the horse too far forward for what they can maintain their balance, they're going to lose rhythm and alignment. And if they shorten their stride too much, then they might actually start to stumble or veer. Thank you guys very much. Thanks for letting me know. So we always want to play with tempo within the framework of rhythm. But in a warm-up, I often like to change tempos frequently, but subtly. So in other words, lengthen a little, shorten a little, and so on. So we wouldn't want to go zoom and slam, right? So thinking again of that framework, always maintaining rhythm and then managing the tempo within that. And that's when you can start to get, your acceptance of the aids. And that's where things get a little bit tricky because you always do have aids on. But at this point, that's when I would start to bring in contact, leg contact, flexion and such. I would say, now we can ride a circle wherein the reins create a flexion along with my body and so on. Because I have a horse now that is in a physical state where they can receive those aids. And they can start to create figure. So I've warmed up the horse, we have rhythm, we have alignment. I found a tempo that works well for them and I'm starting to play with it a little bit, but not so much that I'm throwing them all over the place. And now I can say, what are the figures that are appropriate for this horse's level of balance? And again, with all of these things, we're always looking for the figures that they can maintain rhythm and alignment. And in the classical progression, that's why you start with the 20-meter circle and the 3-loop serpentine and then diagonal line. And as the horse increases their balance, we start to increase the amount of changes and how rapidly they come across, right? We don't have we have a figure 8 circle instead of just one 20-meter circle, or our circle size starts to get smaller, or we come across the corner and suddenly we're in shoulder in, and so on. So we start to increase the demands of transition time. So things come up quicker because there's less time needed to organize. And then we start to decrease the circle size or increase the bend. So you want to keep in mind when you're doing your figures and your circles and such, like and trying to decide what movements to perform, can you maintain rhythm, alignment, and the correct tempo while doing them? And that's kind of a good indicator of where you should be at. So if your circle size gets too small and your horse has to lose rhythm to do it, then you know that that's too small, right? Or if you can't get into shoulder in without losing the horse's alignment because they fold themselves in half, and kind of throw their shoulders off the wall, it's possible that it is a movement beyond their capacity at that moment. So in general, if I'm riding a horse and I'm in the middle of a circle size, I'm riding a 10-meter circle, for example, and I lose rhythm, that is when I'm going to go back to. So it might be that I let go of the circle for a minute, reestablish rhythm. So assessing your horse's training is checking off those boxes. And one thing I often say to my students or in courses or whenever I'm working with somebody and their horse in some capacity is be married to principle, but very flexible in approach. So in other words, I'm in the middle of a 10-meter circle and I notice that I lose rhythm. How do I assess whether I just accidentally lost rhythm for a second or it's way beyond my horse's ability? So it's kind of one of those things where you just experiment a little bit and see, right? So let's say you're in the middle of that 10-meter circle. can you reestablish rhythm on that circle? So that would give me an indicator if that circle size was possible for my horse. So I'm on the 10-meter circle and my horse lost rhythm for a second, but I know in the warm-up that I had rhythm, right? I'm capable of getting rhythm on a straight line, a 20-meter circle. So now I'm on the 10-meter circle and my horse lost rhythm. I can try to refresh the rhythm and kind of let go of the demands of bend and flexion and being on the aids. And if it's possible, then I will reconnect all those things. But if the horse is starting to really struggle and rhythm is not possible at all, then I want to go back off the circle onto the straightaway and reestablish rhythm. So again, I'm always going in the order: rhythm, alignment, tempo, acceptance of the aid, specific movements. So the least important part there is the circle, and the most important part is the rhythm, alignment, tempo, and so on. So that's something I keep in mind when I'm in the middle of a schooling session, as I don't want to get married to the figure that I wanted to have happen. I do want to always be teaching principle. So you can use figures to help enhance a principle, but you want to be very careful that you don't get obsessed with the figure itself, because the figures have a purpose. The outcome of the figure is to enhance the horse's ability to carry weight behind or to get more supple. So if we get hooked on the circle for the circle's sake and we forget about rhythm, alignment, and so on, then we lose the purpose of the circle. But if we use the circle as the icing on the cake of all of those principles, then we actually increase the effectiveness of our schooling session. So most of us are pretty busy. Most of us don't have hours on end to ride our horses. So I think that it's very important to school smarter and not harder, and to also use our time more wisely so that we're creating better movement patterns, and we're also increasing the horse's balance in shorter time without wearing them out. So a general framework for a session is going to be warm-up, and the warm-up would include rhythmic walking, depending on the horse's schooling level, depending on the horse's fitness level, depending on the horse's physical ability. Generally, I always start with rhythm, again, to get joints lubricated, to get the horse breathing deeply, to get them focused, and just to kind of see where they are. So I kind of think of my schooling session like a sandwich. I have a warm-up, a teaching phase or a strengthening phase, and a cool down. And that's depending, again, on where the horse is at in their fitness. A very green horse may never get past the warm-up. The warm-up might be the whole schooling session, but as you increase their ability, you have your sandwich. So warm-up, strengthening phase, and cool down. So again, that would kind of be like rhythmic walking would be the warm-up. Starting some transitions would be the warm-up, depending on your horse's ability again. And then the strengthening or schooling phase, that's where you introduce something new or increase the intensity of something new. So your horse is well warmed up. You don't teach a new skill in the warm-up. You do something that is easy for the horse to do, to get them focused, to get their muscles warm, and so on. And then your schooling phase, assuming your horse is not a rehab or a very green horse, because a rehab or a very green horse might spend their whole session learning about rhythm. But let's say you're in a schooling phase, that would be where I would introduce something new to learn, or something harder to do, such as today we're going to hold shoulder in for 3 extra steps. That's a strengthening exercise. Or for example, today you're going to learn about how to do a walk-halt transition, which we've never done before. Something along that lines. And then we cool down or relax for a little bit, doing something the horse already knows well. So that would not be something too difficult. So in general, in a schooling session, I like to carry, and this is not hard and fast, but in general, I like to think about teaching a new skill, increasing the intensity of a learned skill, or adding a new stimulus, only one of those at a time. So I wouldn't teach the horse rhythm, then teach the horse shoulder in, and then make that shoulder in harder in one session. For example, I would teach the new skill, which would be shoulder in the schooling phase. And then warm up and cool down would be something already hard. And I wouldn't go to a new place, such as a schooling show, where I would teach the horse shoulder in for the first time, because that would be a new stimulus and a new skill at the same time. So those are just some examples. But in general, I try to, again, have a new skill, increased intensity of learned skill, such as shoulder in, teaching for the first time, making shoulder and last longer down the whole long side, or introduce a new stimulus going to a show, right? So by the time you go to a show, shoulder in should be well established, for example. So those are some basic frameworks for a schooling session and how to maximize the productivity of it. In other words, make movement count most without fatiguing the horse, because the horse is going to be the most invested in this if the horse feels good and is not fatigued. So that's what I generally think about is rhythm maximizes the ability of the horse's body to structure itself in a better way without fatiguing it, because it actually feels really good to them. It makes them brain and body kind of come together to where it is a very comfortable experience. If you think about yoga, for example, the most important part, let's say you're new to yoga and you're not very good at it. The most important part of it would be learning to breathe with the movement. So you're breathing and moving in sync. And so your brain and your body are coming together into the place where you are. And then alignment and rhythmic movement would be more important than trying to make the actual shape your instructor is making. So that's kind of similar to this, is moving rhythmically, breathing, and being in good alignment in that sake for a new person to yoga are way more important and beneficial than long period of time and trying to make really exaggerated poses that they can't get into, where you can actually hurt yourself. So in this case, shorter period of time with better accuracy toward rhythm and alignment and breathing would be much more beneficial for an unfit person new to yoga than long periods of time where they really kind of make it hard on themselves. So that's the general framework. So that is what I teach in my courses. I teach that in the calm forward and straight lunging course, which starts tomorrow. I teach that in the in-hand course when that circles back around again. And that is what I will be adding lots of information on in the video library. So if you're looking for places for more support for that information, those are some places to get that. But again, in general, those are principles that I try to stay married to. And in a single schooling session, you might come back and forth several times. If you have a more advanced horse, say you're in the middle of a movement and rhythm is lost, you can flip right back down and hop right back up. But if rhythm is hard for you in general, then you would want to make sure that that was well established before moving on. So again, those are just some general frameworks for a schooling session. I tend to work with a lot of green horses or rehab horses, and so most of the session is teaching rhythm and alignment before they get fatigued. So if you find that things are going downhill south, it's possible that the horse is too tired to be able to advance. So we always have to find the schooling amount of time where we go long enough to get the benefit, but not so long that we get tired. And that's where things are a little bit individual horse to horse. So if you guys would like, I'd be happy to take your questions if you have any. Otherwise, I can just finish up. But when I'm done with this recording will be posted on the Facebook page. I think Facebook keeps them live for 30 days after the live is finished. So thank you guys very much for hanging out with me. If you have ideas for more topics you'd like to hear about, feel free to either send me a message or comment it on here. Always happy to hear from you guys. Oh, here's some good questions. Okay. So Christy's question is, are the videos on your website? If you're talking about the video library, that will be on my website. It's almost done. Just a couple tweaks before I get that done. And then that would be available on my website, which would be amyskinnerhorsemanship.com. Go to the shop page. And let's see. One more question. Julie, your question is, are you working in trot mostly to develop rhythm? So generally in a warm-up or with a green horse, I start in the walk, depending on Depending on the horse that you have, you might not leave the walk if they're not very fit or not very sound. But most of the time I'm starting in walk, but I would want to maintain rhythm in all 3 gaits. So the walk would be 4 beats, trot would be 2 beats, canter would be 3 beats. And as you go up in your ability and your training, you actually would want to start focusing on rhythm within transitions between those gaits as well, meaning you would have a clean change from walk to trot where the horse doesn't hop up, skip, or shuffle in that transition. But the beginning of teaching rhythm I generally do in the walk, just because it's the most stable gait where the horse is the least nervous about their balance. And Greg's asking me if I would return to the whiteboard, so here we go. There's rhythm, alignment, tempo, acceptance of the aids, and then movements and specific figures. And let me see what the other questions are. What are the first signs of fatigue is Tracy's question. That's a great question. It's kind of dependent on your horse. If you know your horse and you have seen these signs before, because sometimes it depends on your horse's history and your horse's personality. But some signs of fatigue is the horse is struggling to maintain a rhythm, even if you had it. So let's say you had great rhythm for a long time, things are going really well, but the horse is suddenly really struggling with it in the turns or in a circle. They might be getting tired. Going above or behind the bit frequently, if they weren't starting out that way, but they're starting to, that's a sign of fatigue. It could be stumbling steps, so the horse is now starting to jab their toes a lot. They're starting to get more resistant to the aids. They're starting to lose focus. They're starting to spook more. Again, this some dependence on personality of your horse. They often will go back to old bad habits when they get tired too. So say, for example, you're reschooling a horse who used to go behind the vertical a lot and you had a fantastic ride, and then all of a sudden they're starting to go behind the vertical again. It's possible that it's fatigue. So in general, horses are going to go back to old ways when they're tired or getting mentally fatigued. And a key thing to keep it in mind here is that while these are very simple premises, being rhythmic, I always have my students practice it themselves. First, they find it very hard to do, and then they get really, really tired in weird ways they didn't expect. So being rhythmic in alignment is actually more tiring than moving poorly for a long period of time. So you might find your horse fatigues a lot faster than they used to when you start working with these principles. Aaron's question is, when you have a horse that you're reschooling and already knows the moves but were done in an incorrect way originally, what's the best way to start over? Aaron, that is my bread and butter, so I'm very familiar with that. I get a lot of dressage horses that are very mechanical, so you could put them in shoulder in and they'd shoulder in themselves all down the long side, but they're not doing it well connected and they're not breathing well. So I actually try to stay away from movements that are over-schooled for a little while and just focus on rhythm and tempo changes. And what you're probably going to find is the horse is not used to connecting to you and really thinking and having a conversation. I kind of call it dancing bears. They're just throwing out movements, hoping that they don't get into trouble. So the first place I start with is, can we connect together and talk together? Can you get rhythmic in your body, and can you stay in position next to me? And so I usually actually simplify the work quite a bit. I try to make it look and feel a little bit different and just see where that's at. Because again, a big part of rhythm is learning to breathe deeply and focus on the work. A lot of dressage horses that are performance show horses, and this is a blanket statement, so it's not true for everybody, but a lot of dressage horses start with acceptance of the aids and movement. So in other words, you put on the side reins and lunge them again and again and again until they learn to accept the contact. Then we get on and we teach them to accept the contact, and then we start schooling for the levels. You know, you have to do this in level 1, this is level 2, etc. So they start practicing movements before they ever learn the concepts of rhythm or being in the right tempo. And a lot of dressage horses nowadays, I don't know if your horse is dressage or not, I'm just getting on a little pedestal here for a second, having a little, or soapbox, sorry. They are ridden over tempo so much that they don't learn to move without locking their limbs. So what I would start doing is trying to find the right tempo after I found rhythm. Latina's question is, as you are working, introducing new things, is a few good tries from the horse okay, then stop and reward? Yes, so I actually have a, the concept of teaching a new movement is that you don't want to teach the movement as a standalone. And so in other words, you wouldn't, so like you warm up the horse in rhythm, they're feeling well in their body or whatever. Bring it back to yoga. Okay, so let's say you're in the middle of the flow of yoga, and what makes you loosen up from the yoga flow is not necessarily just the movement, but the flowing of one to the other, right? So you do your sun salutations. You go up, you go down. You go up, you go down. You go, you know, you're always doing flowing movements to help loosen you up. So the movement is actually the reward itself. You don't want to do so much of it that you get tired, but if you stop and reward the horse in the middle of the session, it is possible that it can tighten them back up and actually kind of take away of the joy of movement. So oftentimes I'll say, I'm teaching shoulder in for the first time, a couple steps of shoulder in, and then we go straight and we enjoy moving straight again. Or I call it letting the movement go through the body. So the shoulder in limbered a little bit and we got the nice feeling of it. And then we're going to take that into the walk and relax, because you'll often notice that the longer the horse walks, the more they get loose, and the benefit from the movement of shoulder in is shown in the walk a halfway around the arena later. So that's something I like to think about too, is I don't like the work to be chopped up. I like it to be very fluid. But yes, in the beginning, if you're introducing a new thing, a step even is perfectly fine, as long as we're thinking in the flow of rhythm. Let's see, Sydney's question is starting in a walk on a lunge line or just walking on a lead. Either would be fine. It depends on how you're working your horse, what your goals are, but either is perfectly fine. If you're trying to work in hand work or lunging, then obviously a lunge line would be the way to go. But there's so many flexible ways in which you can apply rhythm. And people, some of the best people I've ever met at riding rhythmically were ranching and kind of cow horse people, because it's just kind of an intuitive thing when you're working around animals, especially stock animals. So it doesn't have to be any one kind of way. All right. I think I hit the end of the questions. See if I missed any. Really good questions. Oh, I missed one. Sorry, Kathy. This is Kathy's question. Tips for strengthening the canter. If the framework is good, just do more canter. Okay, so the canter is a fabulous gait to talk about because it is the least stable gait. So we kind of have to understand, I don't want to get too overboard in introducing new concepts, but the canter is the least stable gait because you have an outside hind initiating, then a diagonal pair. So one leg, two legs, and then finally the lead leg with one leg again. So there's 2 strides in your canter where you're on one leg. So that's all of the horse's weight plus all of your weight on top of that. And if you don't have good rhythm and alignment, then the horse would be already overusing the inside foreleg. So the fall risk in a canter is higher. So a lot of horses struggle with canter because they feel like they actually have to go too fast, or they will break gait a lot or struggle to get into it because they're worried about their balance, and because it's one of the hardest gaits for them to find comfortable. But it's also a very important gait. So getting good at the canter is nothing to shy away from. But in order to have a good canter, the horse has to have stability of the outside hind. In other words, if the outside hind keeps swinging out all the time in the turns, then the canter is going to be forced to be thrown onto the inside foreleg. So let's say you don't have good alignment, then the horse has to throw themselves into the canter, and the more you practice that, the worse that gets. So if you do have good alignment, meaning the outside hind leg is there, and you have the right rhythm, you have rhythm and you have the right tempo, then you can practice the strength required to get into the canter by repetition, but you want to keep that short. So developing a canter is really more about developing good alignment and then beginning to increase the ability to maintain that in different lengths of stride. So getting more length in the trot while maintaining rhythm would be really helpful for developing better balance for canter. So the canter is a perfect example of this. Is the ingredients that go into the canter are the things I practice the most, and then I can practice the canter actually less than those things. So in everyday sessions, I could be practicing for my canter in the walk warm-up and in the cool down without actually having to canter a whole lot, because the canter is the most fatiguing cardiovascularly as well. Horse is working harder, so you only have a short window before your horse gets really tired. But yes, you can practice getting a better canter by developing better outside hind alignment and then practicing the canter some, but always be thinking about those elements of canter in your warm-up and strengthening that outside hind by getting good alignment so that your strike-off phase can go, your outside hind can go down and your inside foreleg can come up. And that is where most of the trouble for a lot of horses goes in canter, is they throw the inside foreleg down and then they start to scramble. Christy says, my mare freaks out in a canter. I hope this course will help her. Yes, so in the calm, forward, and straight course, we talk a lot about rhythm. We spend a lot of time establishing rhythm, and then we start playing around with tempos, and then at the end, we start really honing in on transitions. So the more you perfect your walk-trot transitions, believe it or not, the better the canter gets. A lot of that panic and canter, again, is anticipation, which blends into M's question next, which is about anxiety and balance. I'll answer that question now, Em. Horses are inherently resistant to falling down, right? We don't really think about how worried they are about falling down because they're domestic creatures in our care and cougars are probably not going to eat them. But deep in the DNA, falling down is the worst thing that can happen to a horse, and they will work really hard at preventing that by tightening and pulling inward. I call it horsey fetal mode, where they basically pull the shoulders in and rotate so that they don't fall down. But in this state of going, they are never going to be able to completely relax because they're always sort of on guard about their balance. And because a horse is a sensory animal, they don't live in words and thoughts like we do. They live in the sensory world. Their balance and their feeling, their physical sensation is much more closely tied to their emotional state. And so horses that are not, that's why rhythm is so important to establish first, because that helps regulate movement and emotions at the same time, because they're the same thing for a horse. If a horse is physically out of balance perpetually when we ride, they're going to be much more prone to spooking, to tuning out, to being anxious, to just being in a general state of unease, which is why, again, rhythm is so important, because rhythm starts to set the framework that the work is safe, the balance is priority, you can breathe, see, and swallow, and you are in a safe balance for your body so that you aren't perpetually worried about trying to catch yourself falling down. And I often tell people, because people often say, well, my horse never falls down. So then I say, does your horse trip? And if the horse does trip, especially in the canter or on the trail, then falling down is a concern, and they are trying to prevent themselves from falling down by tightening. One of my most favorite axioms to remember is that stiffness is the horse's solution to a stability problem. So if they're tripping a lot or feeling really stiff or really sluggish, that's compensating for a stability problem. So that's, again, why those are in the order that they are. Rhythm allows the horse to start to establish their ability to move and breathe and see and kind of get their sea legs. And then alignment starts to hone in that the shoulders are in front of the hips, so the hips are more weight bearing. And then tempo changes starts to increase range of motion, increase flexibility, and so on. And that's when we start to school the figures. All right, I think I have caught up on your questions. All right. So I think that's it for the questions. Thank you guys very much for coming. Hopefully that was somewhat helpful as you go in to design a schooling session. Again, I always say be married to principle, flexible about figures, approach, and specific expectations. So as long as you think about those figures being as long as you think about those principles, rhythm, alignment, tempo, acceptance of the aids, and specific movements in that order, you can always go back, you can always come back up. Don't be afraid to test your work a little bit, push it a little bit and see what happens, because you can always come back, and that gives you a lot of information. But that's a general framework for you to work from. So thank you guys for coming. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and If you're going to the Calm Forward and Straight course, we start tomorrow. So today would be the last day to sign up. And thank you guys very much. I will see you on the next live.